This episode is supported in part by Sacred Wright's public scholarship on religion, gender, and sexuality through a grant from the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation. You can find Sacred Wrights online at sacred-rights.org and the Carpenter Foundation at carpenterfoundation.us. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Rebecca Wolfe to the show. Rebecca Wolfe is a postdoctoral research fellow at Harvard University, graduating with a PhD in sociology from the University of California, San Francisco in 2024. Rebecca's research agenda focuses on the areas of gender, sexuality, the body, and mental health, particularly in the context of religion. Rebecca's dissertation work examined bodily experiences of disordered eating and sexual dysfunction among people raised as women in purity culture, a Protestant evangelical movement. On this episode, we discuss those topics, and specifically her article, As Dieting Returns, So Does Religious Shame, about modern food packaging, messaging, religion, skinny talk, and more. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Rebecca Wolfe. Dr. Rebecca Wolfe, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm delighted that you're here. I'm wondering if we can kick this off by having you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. My name is Rebecca Wolfe. I am a sociologist, and I am currently a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University, and I study a lot of things, but especially what we're going to be talking about today is my work around religion and bodies, which is my favorite thing to talk about.
Fabulous. Well, I would like to know the backstory behind that. How did your academic path sort of take shape? What were some critical stepping stones and turning points along the way that led you to doing what you are now?
Yeah, I stumbled into sociology in undergrad through a GE. I think I, like every other, 19-year-old, had no idea what sociology was.
Same.
Yeah. And even today, I think the question I get most often when I introduce myself or what I do to people at a party, they're like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a sociologist. It's like, what's that? Is the most common response. And it's super fair because it's not one of the things you think you're going to be when you grow up. It's not lawyer, doctor, teacher. It's not one of those kind of cut and dry things. But I stumbled into sociology in undergrad through a GE I took a class with Dr. Kevin Newhouser at Seattle Pacific University, who ended up being a really amazing mentor of mine and really encouraged me in that direction. And I ended up majoring in sociology and, ended up loving it. And then after undergrad, I was an AmeriCorps volunteer and I was at a public health nonprofit. And that really, I think, sparked my interest in medical sociology and the sociology of health and illness, which is what my PhD specialty is in, and what UCSF, the program I graduated from, specializes in as well. It is specifically a medical sociology program, and it's interesting because UCSF is health sciences only, and most people know it as a medical school. But then we also have our funny little corner of people who are doing medical sociology, history of medicine, medical anthropology. There's a little group of us over there within this health sciences university. And that's how I got here. The research topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to know about where religion comes in.
Yeah. So I grew up in the evangelical church. I was at church at least 3 times a week at minimum. On my dad's side of the family, everyone is a pastor or married to a pastor. That's just that's the rules. And so I grew up deeply embedded in that world. And it was a huge, huge, huge part of my identity and sense of self. So yeah, I come from that world. And then I was in this long, messy process in my early 20s of kind of deconstructing that and questioning a lot of those beliefs. And then I entered grad school. I entered grad school with like a totally different research idea. I, again, being kind of in that messy process of deconstructing those things for myself, or like to some degree, just like disaffiliating from Christianity, I started talking about the experiences that I had. And I started talking about, so my work specifically, or my dissertation anyway, looks at the intersection of eating disorders and evangelical purity culture, which we can kind of get into those definitions in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But I started talking about those intersections that I saw because I hadn't really seen anyone talking about it. But like I had had an eating disorder. I was in the process of recovering from my eating disorder while I was in the process of like deconstructing and leaving my religion. And those things were really, really tied for me. And as I started talking about these things, especially in like ex-evangelical spaces I was in at the time, there was all kinds of people who were like, oh, that happened to me or to my sister or to my cousin or whoever else. And so I began to realize like, oh, this wasn't just me. Like there's a there there. And then my wonderful grad school advisor and mentor was like, all right, sure. And let me completely switch and pursue this thing that I, yeah, really cared about and needed on like a personal level also to understand.
Yeah, I was going to say the personal aspect of this is intense. And
Mhm.
that's really cool because it seems like it will be a thing that you can continually picture people like you who are deconstructing their own pasts and their own experiences. So you know that you're not the only one who's ever had those experiences. So you're almost kind of like doing the work in honor of those people who are doing what you've already done.
Yeah, I
That's
think
kind
that's
of how I see it.
yeah. I mean, like, all research is me search, as they say. And so like I had my own like personal selfish reasons where I was like, I really need to understand this. Like I'm like going through this process, but I was definitely like further along in that process than my participants. And so I got to like hold space for these conversations, for these questions, and I got to prompt these things that had been incredibly helpful for me in my own process and were also like really interesting research questions, and have these conversations around them. And it ended up being really wonderful. I like it's been, a good chunk of years now since I was actively doing interviews on that work, but I still feel so like fond of and protective of my participants.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, let's chat about some of your work specifically. You sent me an article, a public facing article I'd love to talk about called As Dieting Returns, So Does Religious Shame. And it kind of sets the stage really nicely for what things were like in the mid aughts and then kind of what they are today. So tell me a little bit about the origin of this piece before we dive into some of the specific details.
Yeah. So I, was born in the 90s and really became an aware human in the early aughts when we had the 90s, early 2000s, like heroin chic, thin is in culture. And then we also had this mid-aughts shift where everything was like wellness culture, right? It was this shift to talking about health. It was like whole foods. It was all of these terms that were and are diet terms. They just didn't say diet on them, right? It's been the rise of like all the packaging says like vegan, gluten-free, like Whole30, like whatever the non-diet diet plan is has been this huge thing in the mid-aughts. And like in many ways it was kind of nice for me. Like, as I mentioned, like I had an eating disorder and all of this. So like it's been really nice that like, the box of Kellogg's is not telling me that like I should really lose some weight. It's been like, oh, you should eat vegan or whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's a step better for me and my brain. But all mediocre things must come to an end. And we are very much returning to thin is in. So we are, yeah, we're back. We've got like skinny talk, which is a huge trending hashtag on TikTok. There's, the Ozempic era. All of the Kardashians have had their like BBLs reversed and whatever else. Like we are very, very much back to thin is in. And with that, we are also back to a lot of this like weight focused diet talk. And that also sees this return of like religious shame language. So, like, a part I kind of skipped over is like in the early 2000s, like the 90s, all of this, it was things were like sinfully delicious or a guilty pleasure, or like there was all of this language that is really religious and spiritual in nature that gets
Hmm.
tied up with diet and diet culture. And with that shift again in the mid-aughts, we like saw a turn away from that where people were like, it was like wellness culture, like just eat, whole foods and like whatever else. So there was like, mm, instead of being like, you should feel bad for eating X, it's like, we made a new version of that and it's made from chickpeas. You're gonna love it, was kind of the shift that we saw there. But yeah, now we are back to hardcore diet culture.
So something I really want to latch onto here is since the early aughts and the mid aughts to today, to 2025, when we're talking, the explosion of social media is obviously super important here. You mentioned skinny talk, which is, from TikTok. It's a hashtag on TikTok. And I'm wondering what you are paying attention to with regards to social media and maybe like what parents like me should be paying attention to as the parent of a young woman. What's going on social media that you're noticing as a professor who's studying these things?
Yeah. There are a lot of things to pay attention to, and there's some really, really good and important research happening specifically around social media and this like focus on skinniness, this focus on like disordered eating. Uh, I think one thing to be really aware of is that these algorithmic entities, these like TikTok, Instagram, whatever else, they are based on feeding you whatever will keep you on the screen. Like this is the attention economy. And there's been some great research out of Australia. Scott something, I will look it up. Uh, he led a team looking at kind of what they termed eating disorder echo chambers on TikTok, and how for those with eating disorders, the amount of like toxic eating disorder content that was like very specifically not just like do a diet, be skinny, but like be anorexic or like you should have bulimia, actively promoting these like extremely harmful behaviors was exponentially higher than like your average user, because these are the things that like whether you want to be paying attention or not, even like if you have like, I mean, for myself, I refer to it as eating disorder brain. Like it's still here and it's still with me, even though I'm like very much in recovery. Is this like predisposition or this like anxiety, this neural network that I built when I was very much in that space that makes me want to watch that content, even though I'm like very much in recovery. I'm more susceptible to that kind of thing. And so even if I don't actually want to watch it, I'm probably going to watch it for a few more seconds than someone else would. And that will make the algorithm feed it to me again and again and again and again. So you end up in these echo chambers. So I think that's something to be really, really aware of. There are things you can do I know TikTok, maybe on Instagram, there is a way to like refresh your feed to like kind of reset your personal algorithm, which can be very helpful. It can just be done in the settings. And then I think also the I don't want to see this feature, what you like really isn't going to affect things too much, at least not nearly as much as what you actually spend time like looking at. That will affect the algorithm much more. But what you say I like, there's like you hit the three dots and there's a thing that says like, I want to see less of this, or I don't want to watch this, or something to that effect. That will have a much greater impact on your algorithm. So those are things that can be done. But I think it's just important to know that these are echo chambers. This is becoming extremely normalized. Like skinny talk content is just mixed in with all of this other like benign stuff that makes it seem normal. There is also all of this like moralizing messaging, right? Where it makes it seem like a moral good to be skinny or like a moral obligation to be skinny, to lose weight. And it's really easy to get sucked into that. So those are things that come to mind, things to be aware of.
Excellent. What is going? So let's talk about today, and then I want to go back in history a little bit. So, what religious messaging is occurring right now with regards to like packaging and print in food products?
Yeah, there's lots of it. If you walk into your grocery store, like, and actually look for this, you'll see it everywhere. Like LaCroix has its like little label on the side and it says like 0 calories, 0 sugars, 0 sodium equals innocent. Like
Hmm.
that it to not have zero whatever makes you guilty, right?
Hmm.
Or like Halo Top ice cream is a really popular like diet ice cream, and it has like angelic imagery where like this is a like moral and spiritual good to be less caloric or whatever else it is. Like the other day I saw Shameless brand gummies that are like low sugar, low calorie, vegan, whatever, these like healthified versions of things are being marketed as like holier in some way where they are like guilt-free, right? These guilt-free foods, which implies a moral weight to food, which just isn't really there, but we talk about it like it is. I think one of the most obvious examples is Lesser Evil. It's a brand of popcorn and other like snack foods. Their logo, their mascot is a very Buddha adjacent character. And they're called lesser evil gurus. So it's like this really clear religious connotation. And I think they've changed their labeling recently, or like it's inconsistent depending on the package, what their like tagline is. But certainly for a long time, and very recently, it was sinful taste, clean snacks. So that like things that taste good must be sinful, Like there's this strong moral messaging around food, particularly packaged food, because that's where you're seeing a high degree of this messaging. You're not necessarily seeing like, I don't know, a Buddha on your like bell pepper that you get at the store. So it's this packaged food that we're really seeing it in. And there's this idea, and it really latches onto this long-standing connotation, this long-standing idea that like quote unquote healthy, like low calorie eating is a moral and religious issue, that something that tastes good must be bad, and it's something you should feel bad about eating, like it's not just bad for you, but something you should feel morally like wrong about eating. And then in contrast, all of these brands are marketing themselves as like morally superior, right? Because they are low calorie or vegan or whatever else. So there's this extremely moralized messaging, and there's this strong bent of religious shame motivating diet behavior in the United States.
That is amazing, and it's so, pervasive, just around us whenever we're just kinda walking to the store minding our own business, the messaging that gets sent, and it's so subtle. That is
Mhm.
so interesting. I'm gonna be, like, on eagle eyes watch now whenever I'm walking through Wegmans this weekend.
Mhm.
So let's go back in time a little bit. I wanna know a little bit about an overview of, like, a brief crash course in Christian history with regards to body messaging, because I found the medieval details within your article so interesting that I would like to just know like where all this comes from. What's a little bit of the history behind how we got to where we are today?
Yeah. Like I mentioned, like these are really long-standing ideas and connotations, and you can take it way, 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 way back. I will take us to medieval.
Yeah.
Seems like far enough to me. But there's this long-standing argument that your body and your body size in particular is a moral issue, which it's not, but it's really hard to kind of believe that really tangibly in the world we're in, when you're walking to the store and you just want to get something to drink and then it tells you that you're drinking something innocent. Like it's a hard thing to do. So it's this centuries old like moralizing tactics are rooted in white Christian history, which I study and did a big historical literature review deep dive on for my dissertation. So way back in medieval Christianity, femininity and womanhood were really linked with bodily, physical things. This is likely in part through like the heavy association with women and the like highly physical act of childbearing and these very like material acts of care and nurturance that were really associated with women. Uh, but yeah, at the same time, the body was also really considered at odds with spirituality, you know, the separation of body and spirit, which like we're not quite to Descartes and the Enlightenment yet, but these ideas came before Descartes. If you wanted to be seen as a good Christian woman, you really needed to distance yourself from bodies and the things that were associated with it. And we saw this in a lot of ways in medieval Christianity. Like there was this guy who was famous for like throwing his naked body into a thorny bush and thrashing the ground because he needed to like punish his physical self to become more spiritual, right? So we have this really like at odds nature of the body and the spirit set up. And fasting was a really common way that people tried to control the body in favor of the spiritual. And a lot of women did this. And the more extreme versions of this is down in the history books as anorexia mirabilis, also nicknamed holy anorexia, which is our first documented eating disorder. So fasting had been practiced for a long time, but this was like a new and extreme version meant to imitate the suffering of Christ on the cross, and really symbolically allowed women to deny their bodily needs and pursue greater spirituality. And there were very few ways that women were able to do that at the time. So obviously, like one of the ways that men like punished their bodies was through celibacy, but women were assumed to have no sexuality. So they had to be celibate, but it wasn't seen as a punishment for them. So they had to, you know, go some steps further. And self-starvation was one of the key ways. Uh, and then, yeah, skipping ahead about 350 years. This is, you know, crash course version. We can't cover all of it. Enlightenment era Europeans also were really seeing a thin frame as this favorable thing, again, through the separation of like mind and body more so in the Enlightenment. So it was like an indication of reason and restraint with this enlightened mind controlling the base desires of the body. And at the same time, we also saw a sharp uptick in the transatlantic slave trade. And that fostered a deeply, deeply racist fascination with Black bodies, which were like slandered as large and animalistic, usually by like white European elites trying to philosophically or intellectually like justify what they were doing by maligning these people and their bodies. Uh, yeah, it was gross. And like that really associated fatness with Blackness in this like incredibly prominent cultural narrative that was getting blasted everywhere in an attempt to justify slavery. And this furthered the vilification of larger bodies through racism. And then at the same time, this is where we really get into the soup of it all. There's so many things happening at once. White Christians were setting off on these big international trips to convert, or, you know, more accurately exploit, but technically convert these colonial subjects all around the world. And thinness and fitness were really emphasized as this key thing that you needed to do in order to like go overseas, be fit enough to make the journey and like hike into the mountains to convert the people, you know. And this again tied together concepts of Christianity and whiteness and thinness. And so like, you know, we're talking about diet and what you eat. So of course it didn't really just matter that you were thin. It mattered what you were eating. In 1724, we got our first ever fad diet on the history books. We got, you know, 1,000,001 of them now, but the first guy to do it, as far as I'm aware anyway, was Dr. George Schein. He wrote an essay of health and long life, and he detailed his quote unquote divinely inspired milk and vegetable diet. Truly a ridiculous amount of milk this man was drinking. It was like minimum 8 cups a day. So much milk. Guess he wasn't lactose intolerant. he was, yeah, so he was really encouraging. Like this was a really religiously motivated thing for him. Um, and he was really encouraging Protestants and especially Protestant women to lose weight. And he was really promoting this idea of a like inverse relationship between weight and spirituality, where it was kind of like the less the matter of your body, the more the spirit, as if it was like a zero-sum game between the two. These things really caught on big in England and other colonial nations and were taken up with great enthusiasm across the pond here in the US. In the late 1800s, kind of a standout figure is John Kellogg. He is the brother of the cereal guy. And he ran a big sanitarium, which is like an old-timey word for like a health spa. And he took thinness in a really explicitly eugenic direction. His whole goal was to reform like Protestant Anglo-Saxon American women into like thin, fit, fertile creatures who would have a lot of children and raise them in the Christian way and keep up supposed like white racial superiority. And he viewed all forms of excess as sinful. He had prescribed a diet not very dissimilar to Dr. George Chines, still a lot of milk. And yeah, so like that was like a very explicitly eugenic bent. It was this like white Christian nationalist diet that tied the fate of like white Christian America to women's thinness in many ways. And then, you know, in the 1900s, we had more fad diets. There was this magazine called Godey's Ladies Book, which was what all of the like good white Christian young women read. And it taught the like rules of polite white Christian society. And that really took up this idea of thinness and practicing like temperance, which was essentially restraint in all things. And it got really applied to diet and to like having your body reflect that restraint and temperance. In the 80s and 90s, catching up here, we had a lot of diets and a lot of really Christian diets. One really well-known one is the Way Down Workshop. It was led by Gwen Shamblin. And like a lot of people did it in the 80s and 90s. And it still is around today, although like in less force. But it really emphasized a belief that the fitness, which is to say like thinness of your body, was directly tied to the fitness of your faith. So there was these like one-to-one connections being made. And then I did in high school the Daniel fast, which is supposedly like built around the diet of like Daniel, the biblical figure, and what he ate, which is essentially like a vegetarian diet. Um, and unleavened bread, no alcohol, you know, all these kind of things. And that is incredibly popular still today. It was popular when I was like in high school. A few years back, Chris Pratt was talking about it on like late night TV. Like it's very much popular and around. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that like kind of catches us up to now, but I just want to emphasize that like these things are not new.
Right.
It's pulling on this huge long history of moralizing language, which makes it so much harder to like kind of escape. It makes it so much harder to push back against when it's like it's, you know, these things are so ingrained in Western culture, in Christian culture, in Western white Christian culture especially, which is kind of the predominant narrative culture of the United States. So yeah, history is repeating itself, which I find personally being able to recognize this history helps me push back against it because I'm like, oh, it's fine. We saw this in the 1400s. Like, I don't need to do this, you know? And helps me remember that like shame is this moralizing tactic of power instead of just something I should actually feel bad about.
I am so tempted to send you a transcript of that train of thought that you just said about the overall history from like medieval times to now, because it was such a concise summary of the different eras of some major turning points, and I feel like you could almost turn that into the first draft of an article.
Yeah.
I will do it. I'll send it to you.
Okay, I would appreciate it.
It was so good. I learned so much. Okay, so you have been published in several places like Health Affairs, Social Science, Medicine. And you've also been on other podcasts like EDGES and Anthrodish, and done a video series through Sage Knowledge. Um, Tell me a little bit about your approach to public scholarship and how you see yourself and what some of your goals in that arena may be.
Yeah. I care very much about public scholarship. I find the insular nature of academia really unhelpful in a lot of ways. I understand, like, there's something to be said for, like, using all of this jargon and using all of this shorthand to convey ideas quickly to people who understand them, to really go deep on a topic. But I think if the things that I write only are ever read by like 5 people who probably already knew this, what am I doing? And I came to, I guess, academia, like I came to research certainly, through like the fostering of my own curiosity through like educational media, through really accessible things. Like I love a educational YouTube video that takes up probably too much of my time. And like I love a podcast. I love learning these things. And if experts in specific topics had not made their work available in those ways, I would not probably be here. I would not have felt that these paths were something for me, were something I could do. And so I'm really grateful for what it like inspired in me, making these things feel accessible. And also, I really want my work to like matter to the people that are affected by the thing instead of just the people thinking about the thing.
Yeah.
So like to my like participants, who were like talked to me in like were incredibly like vulnerable and honest and like shared these really intimate stories of their lives with me. I learned so much from that. And if I don't like tell them what I learned, I think that I'm doing something wrong. And if I don't tell them what I learned in a way that is accessible to them, I think I'm doing something wrong. Like my dissertation is necessarily like hundreds of pages of really long words, but it's not fun to read. It's like full of jargon and it's not particularly accessible. So I care very much about that, kind of on those two fronts, where I think we have these really unnecessary and unhelpful barriers between researcher and researched. And I want to and value like doing my best to break that down and make the work that I do as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And also, I just think that like broadly, we need to be like sharing these things and talking about these things because it's interesting, because it's inspiring, because yeah, there's just this like big public benefit kind of question of it all, right? Where it's like I'm doing all this work, I want it to be of benefit, of interest, and like I mean, to get like all meta about it, there's also these questions about like public trust in science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like public trust in academia and academics, like which has eroded immensely
Yeah.
over time. And I think
Quickly too.
and quickly and immensely. And like I get it. I get why. Because academia and research is so I don't know, obtuse, like it's so insular, it's so ivory tower. And of course, that's not like, if I don't understand a thing, it's hard to trust it. And academia has built a reputation and like clout on being like inaccessibly intelligent, right? And like that's its like claim to fame. That's why you need academia, is because we do something you can't. That's not true. Everyone can do this. Like, you are thinking sociologically every day of your life, I promise. And I don't know. I get so frustrated with this like extremely insular, kind of elitist approach. And I think that public scholarship is one way to start breaking that down, to start building trust in like research and research processes and researchers, and to make this work useful and valuable instead of something that like sits on ProQuest.com for 20 years and no one reads it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As somebody who has written academically myself with, individually and with a little research team and then doing this podcast, like it's not even comparable, the amount of reach that you have with some of these different things. What are some of your goals in public scholarship? What do you want to accomplish and shoot for?
Yeah. I mean, I've got a few projects going. I mean, one thing that I'm really excited about right now is I'm making a zine of my dissertation.
Heck yeah.
Like an illustrated booklet version with like really approachable language, and hoping to get that out into the world. It's taking time. It's slow going because that is not considered part of academic work, and so it has to be like a personal project on the back burner.
Yeah. A few of my friends and I are making a zine too. We're like super into punk and stuff, and I've done every podcast about music, and we're doing a zine related to the other podcasts as well.
That's so fun. I love a zine. I love a zine so much.
Zines are the best. Yeah.
It's accessible. It's reproducible. It's fun. You can draw little stick figures. It's great. So I'm working on a zine of my dissertation, and like that's one thing I'm excited about. Trying to like get some more public facing articles out into the world. I'm really excited to be talking to you, being on this podcast. And I think, I don't know, I generally more and more so am trying to orient my work towards things that are more accessible and even like participatory from the get-go. I think like I love a public scholarship is also orienting my like academic work more and more towards like community-based methods, because like we need to be breaking down these barriers between researcher and research, to like otherwise it gets colonial and extractive really quickly. And that's something I really don't want to do. And I think, I mean, as a side note, I guess, I think that is why I was able to do my dissertation research well, was because I was also studying myself, which kind of really lowered that barrier between researcher and researched. Like, I self-disclosed to my participants in the beginning, like very generically, trying not to like bias them, but I was just like, I grew up in church. I experienced an eating disorder. You don't have to like translate like evangelical lingo for me. Like, I know what these things are. I have this cultural language, these cultural references. And it really seemed to like set people at ease. And we got to have like real conversations. So I don't know. There are so many ways to lower barriers between researcher and researched, which is something I really care about. And public scholarship is one of the best ways to do that. And it's also really fun because I just get to yap about stuff.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, obviously you got a lot of stuff in the works, and you're going to be announcing those things throughout the next several years of your career. Tell people where they can find you if they would like to follow along with what you are up to.
Yeah. One of the best places is my website. It's Rebecca Wolfe, RebeccaWolfe.PhD. And
hey, that's a cool little ending on that website.
I didn't know it existed. But when I was looking for a personal website, I was like, oh, I'm gonna have one of those soon. So I got the domain .phd. And then I'm also on Blue Sky at Rebecca the Wolfe. So that's where you can find me on the internet.
Well, I just found you on Blue Sky this morning as well, so I followed you. So wonderful. I will tag you there whenever the episode comes out. But Dr. Rebecca Wolfe, what a delight to learn so much about the history of dieting, religious shame, a crash course in how we came to be like this as a society with regards to food and bodies and religion. What a delightful story. What a delightful hang. Thank you so much for being here and joining me on Classical Ideas. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.